Welcome to the Memento Mori Fight Club. My name is Fidel.
And my name is Mary, and today we're very excited to have our friend Amber join us to continue our September series on miscarriage and infant loss. Amber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so if you want to start, just give us a little bit of background on yourself, and then you can kind of jump into the story from whatever angle you want to take that.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. My name is Amber Dubois. I'm a resident of South Louisiana. I'm 34 years old. My husband and I have been married a little over a year and a half, about a year and a half. Catholic. He was raised Catholic. I was raised Southern Baptist. Ended up entering into the Roman Catholic Church right before I turned 19. So I've been Catholic for about 15 years. So very solid
That's all.
in our faith. Together, we're very faithful. It's in Mass. We both have our own holy hours. Right now, we don't share.
That's awesome.
Well, we can. I remember I've been doing holy hours for many years, and he really just started having his own a little bit after we got married. He signed up for his own hour. I was like, you don't want to go together? He's like, no, I'd like my own time with Jesus. And I was like, okay, I'm okay with that. So
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
yeah. So it is a sacrifice because that's like two hours from our family a week, but it's really borne much fruit. Yeah, we love our Catholic faith. We love learning about the faith. I teach theology full time at a private Catholic school here. I teach eighth grade theology, and Andrew works full time at some local businesses. Yeah, that's our background and where we're at and what we're doing.
That's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so Amber, we wanted to just continue, like I said, our series for September on, miscarriage and infant loss. So where would you like to start?
Sure. I guess we can start at the beginning, right? Soon after marriage. Having children was something Andrew and I have talked about since we were together. Even before we were together, we both obviously had that desire, the desire put in our hearts what we're created for, right? It's for marriage and for family, as a reflection of the Trinitarian Lord that we all follow and worship. And so even when we were dating, we talked about, being open to life, obviously, and making sure we were on the same page. And then, how many kids did we want? In fact, he brought up the question, which I thought was interesting, showing his love for life. And, we were really just like, however many the Lord decides to bless us with, whether that be one or 10 or whatever. So the desire for children has always been strong with us. I come from a big family, many siblings. Andrew comes from a very big family. We love children, we love family. And we both have that desire to have some of our own. And soon after we were married, God began to bless us. A couple months after we got married, we found out we were happily and excitedly pregnant. It was a time of joy for us. We shared it with some people, not everybody, but we did share even early because the prayers can't hurt, right? They're going to find out
Yeah.
either way. The sooner we had prayers, the better. Because I knew I was older. I was in my 30s, had never had any prior activity in my life, prior pregnancies. This was a new experience for me and for us. And so even though I was older and it was new and exciting, I personally felt very cautious. Andrew, of course, was over the moon and very excited and supportive, making sure I napped and ate plenty. He was very loving in that time. And he had a sense that I was pregnant before we knew for sure. So we were very excited, told some family and some close friends in order to ask us to pray. And before we could actually make it to our first ultrasound appointment, it was very close to Easter, actually. So I was pregnant almost the entire Lent, which I thought was funny because we had gotten married a little early in February. Then it was Valentine's Day. And then when we got back from our honeymoon, it was Mardi Gras, which is a big thing down here in South Louisiana. And a few weeks after that, we found out we were pregnant early March. Actually, it was the Annunciation, March
Oh,
25th. Found out
okay.
that we were expecting the lines, showed on the test. And then a couple weeks later, it was actually Good Friday evening, I started to cramp heavily and was bleeding. And then the night, and even though I hadn't called the doctor yet, I was pretty sure what was happening. I'd had some spotting earlier in the week and I had checked in with like the nurse and she's like, it could be normal, like implantation bleeding, just keep an eye on it. And if it starts to have these kind of symptoms in this many hours, then go to the emergency room. So when the cramps came and like the bleeding got heavier, I kind of knew what was happening. But it was Good Friday, Easter weekend. The doctor's office wasn't open. I didn't want to go to the hospital unless I had to. My symptoms weren't severe enough. I knew what it was. I knew I'd be uncomfortable. If this is what I thought it was, I wanted to be at home, surrounded with my husband and where I was comfortable. But I didn't know for sure until I could go to the doctor. I kind of held on to some kind of hope. And it was very early in the pregnancy, about 8 weeks. So there wasn't a whole lot of, the bleeding didn't last as long as pregnancies that are further along. But I couldn't get to the doctor until Tuesday because Good Friday, Easter weekend, Easter Monday, they were closed. And my OBGYN is amazing. I'm blessed with he's a Catholic doctor, he's a pro-life doctor. He actually often speaks, like goes to state events when like we were talking about state laws in Louisiana about pro-life laws. When Roe v. Wade was overturned and the laws were left to the state, he would like testify with his medical experience on the pro-life side, and the danger abortions cause to women and stuff like that. So he's a very mindful doctor. He and his wife himself have experienced miscarriage, and so his bedside manner is very excellent, very gentle, very loving. So we did make an appointment, was able to go in. They sent me for some blood work, of course, and then 2 days later for the repeat blood work to confirm that the HCG hormone was dropping as it usually does at that stage. So we were very saddened in a special way that miscarriage, being that it happened on Good Friday, there was a special unity for me with Christ's passion, and especially with the Blessed Mother and like her son giving up his life and us losing the lives of our child that day. I remember Easter Sunday, we had gone on a walk. We have a dog. We walk him each day. It's good for us, good for him. And it's when we go together, we call it family walk. So we usually talk about house things or finances or whatever we need to discuss. And so I said before we go to the doctor and everything's confirmed, because I knew once it was confirmed, that's when my emotions would catch up to me. At that point, I was able to kind of keep it at bay. Like I was feeling it, but I was able to kind of like build like a little temporary dam
kind of stay calm and
just try to be reasonable, which is normal. Like in a crisis, I do very well. And when it's over is kind of when it catches up. I discussed with him that I'd like to have a name picked out before the dam broke, right? So that way it's kind of decided. And so we talked about it, and that Saturday, Holy Saturday, was my maternal grandfather's birthday. He had been deceased for a few years, but that day, Holy Saturday, was his birthday. Andrew and I had already had some names picked out for our first girl and first boy. I would say he picked them out, and they're pretty great names. So I was like, do we want to use one of those, or do we want to use another name? And so we decided to kind of save those, but all the names we had already picked were family, named after family and saints. And so we kind of thought a minute, and I was like, it's Grandpa Daniel's birthday. What if we did the name Daniel? And he's like, yeah, that sounds really good. Because my Grandpa Dan was not Catholic. He wasn't necessarily religious. I'm like, if anybody needs prayers, it's this grandfather, right? And if we have a little saint, then he has a little job, which is to pray for his namesake, Grandpa Dan. And so then we had the middle name. I won't go to the story today, but the house that we bought, or Andrew bought a few months before we got married, really was not have been possible without the intercession of Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph had a big part to play in our home. And so I was like, Daniel was created in our home and lost in our home. So let's do Daniel Joseph. And Andrew said, well, one of my grandfathers, his middle name was Joseph. And I'm like, perfect. So,
I love that. So he's named after his great grandpa then.
Yeah, Daniel Joseph. So that was our first one, but I was very saddened. Part of me, obviously as a first-time mother, right? I'm still his mother, even if he's no longer living. And like processing that, the physical hormones and the craziness that comes with it, as well as, the spiritual and emotional side of it as well. Again, Andrew was very supportive, and that was a whirlwind of a time. So that Friday that we lost Daniel was actually Andrew's first holy hour ever. He had never been a holy hour in his life. He had signed up the Sunday before, and he was like, guess what I did after Mass? And I'm like, bought a bread maker because he should not be unsupervised in Costco. And he's like, no, I signed up for my own holy hour. It's usually on Fridays, but they said the tabernacle would be closed on Good Friday because of the Triduum, but he said, I still want to go. Even if the tabernacle's closed, I still want to go because it would still be open if you have the code. And so he went, and it was like later that night that the miscarriage process began. And then like the following weekend, he had gone to his holy hour and then came home feeling sick and had a stomach virus. And then the weekend after that, his uncle Sonny passed away. And the weekend after that, my stepmother's dad, my step grandfather, passed away. So it was like that whole month, every weekend, every holy hour we went to, we had
Uh-oh.
something going on. So we really had to rely on each other through a lot of that in many ways. So
Well, then just the
overall,
grace of being in adoration, being with the Blessed Sacrament, being able to process that grief with our Lord there, I'm sure was providential, like the Lord knew what was coming and he signed up for that holy hour, him not knowing
mhm.
what's coming or what's going to happen, and divine intervention. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it definitely gave us, and I think Andrew, strength that we wouldn't have had otherwise, And men and women grieve differently, right? So, for me, like I was going through all the things, so Andrew's priority was taking care of me. Like his focus is like making sure she's okay, right? Obviously, he has feelings too, but those are kind of being on a post-it note up on the side, right? Because his focus is his spouse, making sure she's
Yeah.
okay. And like I'm comfortable talking. I At that point I had already had several friends who had gone through miscarriages. And so I felt comfortable enough to be like, hey, this is happening to me, and they would like sit with me and cry with me as fellow mothers. I call them sisters in loss, right? Instead of sister-in-laws, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a shared experience. It's a club you don't want to be a part of, but once you're in it, you're glad you have each other. It's like other women who wouldn't cry, when you talked about that grief or that pain, because they've been through it too. They've been members of the school of suffering. So even if the journey is different, the suffering is universal. That was a big support for me, even having that community of women and mothers who had been through something similar that I felt safe reaching out to, if I needed to talk. And then my husband, Andrew, he's quieter, he's more private. He's not somebody to pick up the phone and call a friend if he needs to
Mhm.
talk about his feelings. Usually he kind of needs to be left alone, right? And just give him time and space to reflect. Very melancholic, and I admire that about him. And then when he's ready to talk, bring it up or answer stuff. So we had the strength of adoration and the sacraments, but we were still kind of off sync a little, really just talking about the grief, just because we were experiencing it so differently. And then we were going through all these things every weekend following, we had gone to like a first communion mass together, which was kind of heavy, seeing all these little children dressed in white. So like there's other friends having baby showers and gender reveals, and I made the personal decision just to tactfully avoid those for a little while. Take a step back, be mindful, because those things are to celebrate those women, and I don't want to go and make it about myself. I didn't know if I could hold both the joy for them and the sorrow for myself in the same hand. It was at the time it was just too big. So I gave myself permission to say, sorry, I can't make it, and not have to give a reason, and that's okay.
And Amber, I think that's super important for people. I think a lot of times, especially just as friends, you're excited, you want to be there for their friends, they're having these good things, but then also to just have the mindfulness of the space that you're in and where you're at in your suffering and what you can and what you can't handle at a certain time. So I think that's such a huge key point that you just said. Like, you gave yourself permission to take a step back and say, like, this is not a space that I can be in right now. And for other people, no matter what it is, if it's, loss of a child like you, or any other grief that people are having, that if there's a space that they cannot go into, to give themselves permission to just take a step back and give them the time that they need. I think that's huge. I think that's so critical. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and so anyone listening who's been through something like that, like it's okay. You have permission to say, no, I don't think I can emotionally handle that right now, not in a healthy way, and that's okay. Because I thought about like forcing myself to go, and I was like, why? What would be the purpose of that? Like they'll be fine. They'll still be celebrated. There's other people. It doesn't have to be me. I can celebrate them in another way.
Yeah.
Offer my whole. I can offer my holy hour for them. Something like that. So,
And I think also for us, like from the outside, to also be aware of there could be situations like that in which you have to be you have to help people who are going through that just by giving them their space and not force anything. Even if you care about them, sometimes the best thing to do is to give them space.
I agree. And sometimes it's okay to ask, like, hey, do you need company or do you want space? And they'll tell you if you ask them point blank. I find if you're asking general questions like, do you need anything? They're processing so much they don't even it can't compute, you know. If you're more specific, it's like, would you like me to drop off dinner or groceries? Like just make the decision smaller. They're much more likely to respond and receive as well. At least that was for me and for most women I've communicated with, you know, make it smaller. Or how are you feeling? You need to be more specific. How are you feeling today physically or this afternoon physically? Trying to be a little bit more grounded in the questions and more specific, I find very helpful, especially for someone who's dealing with any kind of big trauma or grief or challenging situation. That does seem to help.
Well, and I think too, we experienced that when my dad was in the hospital and he coded, and we have this whole thing, and you're getting this like influx of phone calls and people want to help and they want to come over, and you're just like, I can't, like, stop talking to me. You know what I mean? So, like you said, we had a friend of ours, and she said, she didn't even ask. She said, I'm dropping dinner off at your house at 6 o'clock. And so she dropped it off, left it, like rang the doorbell, left it on the porch and left. And it was such a,
Gift.
just like, we didn't even have to think or ask or anything. She was just like, this is what I'm doing. If you want to eat it, fine. If you don't, let it rot. Like, but here you go. This is what I can give you right now. And just, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, then in ways that aren't invasive, just like that. Like, hey, I'm dropping off dinner. It's fine if you don't want it or not. So very beautiful. What a gift. Yeah. So one of the most helpful things for us was a few months later in August. And I'm not sure if you two are familiar with this ministry. It's called Redbird Ministries. It's newer. It was founded here in this diocese, actually, in Lafayette, but it's all over the country now. They're trying to like get groups going on in every diocese. Redbird Ministries. It's for grief and loss of children at any stage in life. So it goes from miscarriage to stillborn to early childhood death, like SIDS or illness, genetic disorders that cause children to die before their time, older children or adults who die by taking their own lives. So Redbird Ministries is a holistic grief support group. It's based in Catholic teaching, but you don't have to be Catholic. And it's a holistic approach. So it's not just the spiritual and prayer side. It does, it's about community and the emotional sharing and feeling connected. And so they do several events throughout the year, some here, some abroad. They'll do a couple workshop a couple of times a year where the husband and the wife can go for a day. It's usually on a Saturday from like 8 to 4 and it ends with mass. And they do like women's retreats and men's retreats for mothers and fathers. And of course, they have the sacraments. So it's very beautiful. They have a website. I think Hollow connected with them. So they have some information, episodes on Hollow. They have grief groups specific to the type of loss. Even on the retreats and the workshops, they like table you with people who share your loss, like the same kind of loss. So if you had a miscarriage, everyone at your table has had a miscarriage. If you've had a stillbirth, everyone at your table has had it. And so they do like small groups and talks. So it's a beautiful ministry. I definitely recommend it. I actually just went on as a leader on a Redbird retreat last weekend, and just seeing the women come in on Friday from I don't want to be here to their joy and their smiles on Sunday was just a beautiful witness, because everyone there by the time they left felt understood and felt heard and felt seen, and can take that with them. So Andrew and I had gone on a couples workshop back in August, and we found that very fruitful because not that it gave us permission, we could always talk about what had happened, but it gave us that intimate space, right? Because at home, there's always something to do. There's chores, there's laundry, there's cooking, there's grocery shopping, there's the mother we got to call back and the brother we got to get back to about this thing on Saturday. Like there was always something going on, where the workshop really gave us like that space and that permission to like, and they gave us like conversation starters as well, like to talk about things that we needed to talk about and we both knew we needed to but didn't get around to it or didn't have the right space. And they also offer, we didn't partake that day, but they do offer spiritual direction and counseling for those who want to sign up for it, couples or individuals. So I think that was one of the most fruitful things that we did together, communicating and growing from the grief.
Sounds like it was a space where you guys could be more intentional about going through the process of talking about it so you can heal as a couple. I think that's
Heal, yeah, and heal together, right? Because at that point we were both grieving, but we were grieving differently and hadn't, like, we both knew it, but hadn't talked about our own grief, in a fuller way. And so it let us both be able to do that at the same time, rather than me just talking about mine and him not talking about his. We were both able to share. So yeah, intentional was a great word for it. Thank you for that.
Amber, how would you say, or I guess like what advice would you give on if you're both in this grieving process, the ministries that you're talking about aren't available in people's areas, how would you encourage spouses to enter into that conversation? To say like, hey, we both need this space, like we need to just kind of shut everything out. How would you encourage them to start that conversation?
Without a retreat or like
Yeah,
that.
just as a couple, like, if they don't have that retreat or anything, what would that look like?
Well, I think it depends on timing, right? So, like, if we had gone to that workshop 1 month after the loss, we may not have been ready to have that conversation yet together, because we both grieve and process our grief in different ways and on different timelines. Every person is different. And so every couple is a little bit different because they're made up of two persons, two different people who've come together in a shared mission. So I think it depends. I think for us, the timing was good and we had the resources. For those who may not have those resources, the first thing I think you would have to consider is where you are, whether you're the husband or the wife, like where you are in your grief, the timing of it, because your spouse, you don't want to force your spouse into a conversation if you're not ready. Again, you have to think about, most people don't want to have a conversation like that because it's heavy and it's painful and it's dark. You don't want to be in it, but you're in it. And so doing it gently and compassionately, but it depends. Like, one spouse may be more open to talking about it, one may not. Sometimes it helps just to plan like a little getaway. If you don't have a resource, maybe plan like a little bread and breakfast weekend or a little camping trip or something to kind of get you away from the things. And once you're away from the busyness, we call it the hamster wheel of life. Once you get off
Yeah.
the hamster wheel, you're more empowered to have that conversation at the pace you want to have it. But it kind of takes for most people, it takes, you have to get off the hamster wheel, because as long as you're going on the hamster wheel, the grief is not going to get the attention it deserves for both of you, and the marriage won't get that attention it deserves. That's a personal hot take, but that would be my suggestion. Like, once you're ready, like, plan some time away together, without kids, without other family, away from work. It doesn't have to be a full-on silent retreat or a couples workshop, but give yourself that time and space so you can give yourself permission to share and to talk, and it gives you all the time you need.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
okay. So you mentioned earlier something about just clinging to hope. Like you wanted to have hope between those days in which you knew you were having the miscarriage and when you were gonna find out that that's what it was happening, you know? How was it that you managed those days where you wanted to have hope? Was it hard to have that hope or it just came naturally for you?
That is a beautiful question. Thank you, Fidel. How did I manage? Lots of previous experience with suffering. Many years of, like, some counseling I had done in my past, dealing with other difficulties in life. I've been in spiritual direction myself for a while. So I had a lot of skills at my disposal that not many people may have: mindfulness exercises, like practical grounding things, like on one level. But on another level, I think there was some Holy Spirit involved there as well, trying to give me peace. Down here in Louisiana, we're very used to hurricanes, and it felt much like a storm, a hurricane storm. But somehow in those days, it was kind of like I was in the eye of that storm, right? Which is the most peaceful part of that structure of the hurricane. So it was kind of like I knew it was swirling around me. I could hear it. I could feel the water. I could feel the wind. But at that time, it wasn't allowed to touch me yet. It did have to swim through it eventually, but I had that time to get strengthened. I think specifically for me, because it was the Holy Triduum, there were extra graces in that, because I still went to Easter Vigil Mass where the veil is the thinnest. So, and my child was already, with the Lord, hopefully. And so the veil was the thinnest. So I was like, I wasn't going to miss that chance to be reunited in Him in the communion of saints. Some old friends and I used to say, see you in the Eucharist. So I think there were some special graces, and maybe a holy confidence in knowing that, yes, I was not ever going to be able to physically hold my child on this earth, but hopefully one day, if I do it right, I will, you know. So it was kind of a confidence in that. But it was difficult. It was more difficult actually with the second miscarriage that we had later down the road. After Daniel, I had talked to Andrew pretty soon after Daniel. We had talked, and I was like, I'd like to wait about 6 months before we like actively pursue pregnancy again. If it happened before and with the Lord's will, that was fine. We're aware of NFP practices and we somewhat implement them, but we just like to live freely and just live the married life, and what happens happens. And that's how we got pregnant both times. We've been pregnant, happened that way. But after Daniel, I needed some time to physically heal, to give me space. I wanted to honor the life that was my child, but not just try to replace him right away. But I also didn't want to wait too long to where we could have issues later. So about 6 months later, after the couples workshop, we were like, okay, let's, we're gonna be wide open again, not just a little open, wide open. And we got pregnant in October of the same year. So, like 6 or 7 months later after losing Daniel. That pregnancy, again, Andrew could kind of see signs before, making sure I was eating a lot. I was like needing a nap every day, and I craved McDonald's French fries so much. It was ridiculous, And so, like, because I'd been pregnant before, I kind of had that feeling like, oh, this could be it, right? And so, but I had been doing some traveling at the time, so I waited a bit longer to test because I didn't want to find out and not be able to see Andrew in person. So I waited till I was home, tested positive. We were very excited. Scheduled my doctor's appointment, which they kind of schedule. Usually they like to wait so many weeks for the first ultrasound, but the soonest they could get me in was around 11 weeks. And normally they do about 8 to 12, depending on availability. And so we're excited, but then the week of that ultrasound, I start slightly spotting again. And like my symptoms are feeling a little like I felt pregnant, but then I felt a little less pregnant, but like there hadn't been a lot of change, just like a slightly lessening of appetite, maybe less fatigue. And I was hoping maybe I was just going into the second trimester, my body was kind of figuring it out. So we had gone to that ultrasound, and at that point, you should be around 11 weeks, you might be able to detect a heartbeat. And so that was something we never got with Daniel. We never got an ultrasound picture or a heartbeat or any of those experiences. So that's something, if we could have it, we wanted that with our next child. So Andrew was able to take off and come with me for that 11-week appointment for our second pregnancy. At first, it was extremely exciting because as soon as the ultrasound began, we saw that we were carrying twins, right? Which is very beautiful. It's something that actually runs in Andrew's family. But in the same appointment, the doctor couldn't detect a heartbeat on either one. So it was very, very quiet. And it got very still. And I remember having to take a deep breath, you know. And the doctor wouldn't say definitively. He's like, it could just be too early. So we're going to do some blood work, today. We'll send you with some orders. We'll do another set of labs in a couple of days. And then we'll have you come back. And so again, they're looking for that HCG hormone. If it's rising, pregnant. If it's falling, either not pregnant or it's like a missed miscarriage or something. So we're very quiet. Andrew and I are not saying very much, but he gives me the lab orders. We do the lab work. 2 days later, I go for more lab work. And then that afternoon they call and they confirm that, we had lost both of them. On the Saturday, I start cramping and bleeding, and the first twin is delivered. I'm able to salvage her. We kind of just cancel all of our plans. This is the weekend before Thanksgiving. And then that, in less than about 12 hours, I cramp and bleed, and the second twin is delivered. And so obviously we're very heartbroken, because after the first twin, there was some hope, like maybe it's just one and the other one's okay. Like we didn't know. And again, it was a weekend. The cramping started on a Friday. The first delivery was very early Saturday morning. And then the second delivery, obviously very preterm miscarriage, delivery was Sunday morning. So we had already pre-decided again on I had told Andrew after we had lost the first twin because we were able to salvage their remains, I wanted somewhere to bury them. And so he had figured out that we would take them to some family property that we plan to build on one day that's very close by. And we were able to bury both of them there. And we named them Ruth Marie, after my mom's middle name, and then one of his grandmothers. And then the other twin is Teresa Kay, which is the middle name of both of our godmothers as well. My godmother, or her husband, is actually a deacon. And so the following weekend, he was able to come and say the rite of Christian burial for our two twin girls. But because we never had anything for Daniel, he was able to include him in the rite as well at their burial site. So that was very beautiful for us then. But it was very different because it was almost double the children, double the pain. We had already experienced one miscarriage, and now we had three in a span of a few months, like all within the same year we got married, you know. So yeah, that one I find they're different. Like in some ways Daniel was more difficult for us because it was our first one and it was heavier. And like with the twins, it's almost kind of like when I was pregnant, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop even before anything had happened. Like as soon as I was pregnant, like pregnancy after a loss is different than being pregnant for the first time or having healthy pregnancies, because like you're always kind of on your toes waiting for something to happen or waiting to make a mistake or do something wrong. Not that it's anytime the mother's fault, but it was just kind of like holding your breath, you know. And so I remember in the ultrasound room, you know, when we found out they were twins and then found out they were no heartbeats, my heart really just went out to Andrew actually in that moment. Like I hurt for myself, but I hurt for my husband because, you know, and this is a lie, of course, that the enemy wants me to believe, and we rebuke him for it. But like he wants to be a father so badly, you know, and I feel like I fail him, you know, in these ways. It's not true, right? But just my heart hurts for him as much as it does for me because he does have a fatherly heart. So, yeah, so the healing for that was different, you know, and that was less than a year ago. It'll be a year this November. And so again, we had to do some grief work and have some conversations. We didn't need a couples retreat this time because we had just done one and we were able to use those tools. But the holidays were really hard because the twins had just happened around Thanksgiving, which is around when Daniel was due to begin with. So like Christmas, I should have had three and I had none, you know. I remember my arms hurting. Like I felt achy in my elbows and my arms, right? Like there was a physical emptiness to it. The most helpful thing for me there was, again, not pushing myself to go see family. Like we went, but in limited time slots. We didn't go like all day. We would go a couple hours here, come home and rest, couple hours here. But I had a friend who brought some blessed candles for me. When we would go to family, I would just take the candles with me, put them somewhere where I could see them and just light them. So anytime I was in conversation or I was thinking about my children, all I had to do was just like look at the candle, right? To kind of like give a place to direct the grief to, so it didn't just bottle up or explode out, you know. But the twins we hadn't told people about, like we had Daniel, because we were waiting, you know, to see. So that one was harder breaking the news to people, I find, because it's like, oh, yes, we were pregnant. We lost pregnancy. By the way, it was twins. So people's reactions to that was pretty, um, um, yeah, sympathetic.
And so that was November of last year. So we're coming up on a year after that loss. And you said this has all happened within your first year of marriage. So y'all are now in your second year of marriage. You've lost three babies. How is the dynamic shifted within your own heart in terms of, you know, like God has obviously called you and Andrew to marriage and the beautiful vocation that is. And I love Fulton Sheen because he says, you know, it's three to get married. You have to have the husband, the spouse, and God. And how has that image, that Trinitarian image of marriage, changed through this experience of very deep grief and suffering? Because it is a unity with our Lord in his passion. You literally lost your son on Good Friday. And then before Thanksgiving, which Eucharist means Thanksgiving, right? You lose your twins. How has that Trinitarian image of marriage become more real for you, and to just like, unites you in a very real way with the passion of our Lord.
It's definitely, we've talked about it and the impact it's had on our marriage and our faith. And on an individual level, it's definitely strengthened our reliance and dependency on the Lord. As I can't speak for Andrew's inner heart, but I know for me, I had to go through some grief, and they weren't in stages. They weren't one step at a time. They were like all at once or none at all. The denial, the anger, the it wasn't necessarily a why question for me. Like, I've been through other things in my life we don't have time to cover in this episode, but I've been through things in my life that I've gotten used to not being able to get an answer, at least not in this life, which hopefully means there's some trust in his plan for that. But for me, there was a lot of emotions, and it depended on the day. Still comes in waves, honestly. But in the Trinitarian union, again, we have that hope, that holy confidence and hopeful confidence that God willing, especially as being as the best parents as we could, bearing our children, honoring them, giving them the right, of their burial, that hopefully they're, because we're all called to be part of that Trinity. That's why we're created. It's not just, oh, Trinity of Father, Son, Holy Spirit is over there and we're over here. No, the invitation of God's love is to unite us to that Trinitarian relationship, which is ultimately heaven, right? And so we hope that our children, are already part of that union, and as long as we're on earth, we're trying to stay connected to it in that state of grace. But for me, it's yeah, it's been a journey of many emotions, but also a strengthening in my trust in the Lord, which is not something that comes naturally for me to do a lot of work. There's this one phrase, and I can't stand it. It really just roast my marshmallows when people say it. And if someone's listening and they do say it, it's okay. I'm not like coming for you for blood, but it's just the theology of it for me never sat well. And it's that quote people repeat, that Mother Teresa, or I think she's given credit for saying, like, God won't give you what you can't handle, right? And I feel like the way she meant it and the way people use it are not congruent. Like, we say, oh, God won't give you something that you can't handle, right? Is usually the emphasis there. But the way I've always heard it is like, God won't give us anything we can't handle without Him. Like, it's missing that end without Him. Like, in a way, some of us have to hit rock bottom, with our grief, with our sorrow, to realize He is the rock at the bottom.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of the best way I could describe that grief journey for me. That's the best kind of summary I can give. For Andrew, obviously his journey has been different. He's really astonished me, considering like his reversion to the faith, and he's only really been back in the Catholic Church and active in his faith just about a year before we got married, really. So he's really only been an active practicing Catholic in his adult life the last 3 years. And he's just got so much trust in God and his timing and his plan. Like, I've been Catholic a lot longer, and I'm like, how are you doing this? Like, he inspired me with that trust, and him being the head of the household, I'm in a way submitting to trust, right? Rather than my lack of
You.
trust. When we talk about it, we feel it's brought us stronger and closer together, and it's deepened our faith. And something Andrew said once, which like in a way like inspired me and crushed me, is that he's taking, while we're waiting for living children, and because we have children in heaven, it makes him want to take his faith even more seriously, because he wants to be the dad that they deserve, whether it's our current children in heaven or the ones we hope to have living on earth in the future, which is very beautiful.
Very,
And an
very.
affirmation that I married the right person,
Yeah, for sure.
um for me. And so, yeah, it's really brought us together as a couple in that Trinitarian relationship, and having God and the cross between us and beside us and within us, but also that hope of the Trinitarian union that we hope to have in heaven. It's really just given us extra ammo to work to get there, to fight the battle to get there, because that's the only way we'll see them again, right? If we get there too.
But yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Amber. Do you have any last piece of advice that you want to give people who are listening? Any last pointers?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, especially for men or women who experience this particular grief, but really any kind of grief, there's a tendency, and I'm guilty too, to hold on to the grief, to kind of cling to it like a blanket, almost like a security blanket, because we feel like if we let go of the grief, we're letting go of the love, that we're letting go of the child, or we're letting go of their memory. So many tend to fall into this tendency like, well, I don't want to let go of my grief. I don't want to be joyful again, because if I'm joyful, it means I've forgotten my child, or that I don't love them anymore. Because we know that grief is really just love with nowhere to go, right? It's love unexpressed. And that's the simplest definition of grief I've heard. And so it's love unexpressed, but you can be joyful again, right? You can hold both sorrow for the loss of your loved one, whoever that may be. You can hold on to that grief, but also experience the joy, right? Just like with Jesus, there's no resurrection without the Good Friday. And even though Jesus is resurrected, he still carries his wounds. Every mass we go to has both his passion and his resurrection. So in our own hearts, we can carry the passion of our children, their suffering, and our own, but also that hope for the resurrection for ourselves and for our little ones and our loved ones too. So I guess my advice is for those who are like holding on to that grief. It's like the man that Jesus came to heal. Do you wish to be well? Right? Jesus wants us to be well. He doesn't intend death. He doesn't want us to suffer. He doesn't want us to have this grief, but he's not going to take it away. He will transform it. And just to encourage those people that it's okay to feel joy again and to have that hope, yet still love what's been lost and love yourself at the same time.
Thank
That's
you so
beautiful.
much.
Thank you, sister, for sharing that. Okay, everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us. Amber, thank you so much for just sharing your heart and your story and your life with us on this channel. I know that it's just going to bless so many people. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amber.
Thank you for having me and for listening.
Okay, everyone, that'll do it for today's episode of the Mentor Mary Fight Club. Remember, nothing is wasted.
Keep fighting the good fight.